Hello everybody, my name's Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where I discuss a news story or a topic of workplace culture and some practical things that you can do over the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. So let's get into today's episode. Hello everybody, it's Colin here. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Coffee. I've got a fancy intro now, which you may have heard. I'm going to dial up the professionalism of these podcasts. Well, at least the intro and the outro, if not actually the content. I am on the beautiful Mediterranean island of Mallorca. I know, it sucks to be me this week, and I am having an Americano and the beautiful warm sunshine here. I'm heading over to Europe this week, to Holland and the UK to do some work, and then to North America the week after to do some work there. It's become apparent over the last probably 4 weeks or so. I think there was a fair amount, and this might be true for your organisation. I don't know. There's a fair amount of treading water, I think, with regards to culture. Certainly at the beginning of this year, but even up to kind of April, May. And I think people have started to realise that actually the problems that they've got aren't going to fix themselves. Passive aggressiveness is just one such issue. I think there was still a sense that kind of post-pandemic, we're still trying to shake some things off. Once people get back to the office, if you work in an office environment, once you get back to the office, it's going to work itself out. Yeah, it didn't do that. And so, for me, the inquiries that I'm getting now is people who genuinely need help to reset. And for those of you who know the work that I do, it's about giving people the practical tools to be able to do it themselves. I think that's the key. And I've been watching the Ryder Cup golf over the weekend, and what's noticeable, or certainly what was noticeable in the first couple of days, was the Europeans had much more camaraderie. And that's because they actually spent time together and agreed how they were going to operate as a team before they even got to the tournament, where the Americans didn't. And in some respects, it's as simple as that. Obviously, it's more complex than that in terms of some of the activities that you have to undertake, which is the work that I do, of course. But if you want to avoid passive aggressiveness, if you want to avoid individualism undermining the collective performance of the team, then you have to agree some standards. You have to be honest about where you are and what you want to achieve. You have to agree how you'll use technology. You have to be clear about what are the processes and values that we've got. What's our vision and how we collectively going to help each other to get there. Now, passive aggressive behaviour has been on the rise since the end of COVID. Now, during COVID, if you remember, during the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, there was lots of empathy. We're all in this together. Remember that? We were all in this together when everybody was locked down at the same time. And then, we kind of weren't all in it together, because then different countries started taking different approaches. And then different states in different countries started taking different approaches. If you're in the US, you know what I mean. If you're in Australia, you know what I mean. Victoria had some of the harshest lockdowns, and there were reasons, and they were all justified, and all these kind of things. But the empathy started to erode when we were all under different conditions. And so there was a poll done at the end of November last year, and almost 3/4, it was 69%, so almost 3/4 of the people agreed that since COVID, passive aggressive behaviour has increased. And that's not a good thing. Now, passive aggressive behaviour, typically, for those of you familiar with my culture model in Culture Fix, so I wrote about this, is where you get a shift from a pleasant culture. Now, pleasant culture is where everyone's being the best version of themselves. They aren't necessarily as engaged as you need them to be. But they're all wanting to be the best version of themselves, and that's a good thing, but the engagement's a problem. That's why we're not making progress. It's where you shift from pleasant to combatant, where all of a sudden we become more engaged, either because we've got deadlines to hit, either because people are putting pressure on us to hit targets. And what we start doing is behaving poorly. Now, there are different ways that different people do this. I'm going to talk about some of these and ask you if you recognize any of them, either in yourself or in other people. Because when passive-aggressive behavior becomes the norm, you shift from a combatant culture into one that's more toxic, and then you've got a real problem. You've got a real problem. And it doesn't take much to move from this combatant culture where kind of people are behaving poorly into a situation where it becomes harmful for employees, stress and anxiety and all of these things. But when it's combatants, you can do things about it. And so that's why I think this is really important. And so it's always great to get requests to talk about topics on podcasts. So I'd like to thank the people that wrote in and asked. I had a request to deal with passive-aggressive behavior specifically, and one to talk about poor behavior. So I'm going to kind of fold those into one. So yeah, almost 3/4 of people say since COVID, passive-aggressive behavior's gone up. 1 in 5 women experience passive-aggressive behavior every single day. Every single day. So that's appalling. And you can do something about it. So I think, the first thing to do is to understand what passive-aggressive behavior looks like. Now, the root cause of it, is a lack of emotional intelligence, because people aren't thinking about how they feel. They're not recognizing the behavior, and what they're doing is they're allowing anger to manifest itself in ways that's not motivational. I've talked in the past about how anger can be used as fuel for motivation and inspiration. But as soon as you let something come out of your mouth, or as soon as you commit something to paper that's a demonstration of your anger, then what you've done is you've kind of fallen into bad behavior. And then how you choose to say something is a demonstration of whether it's actually aggressive, and that's kind of the door to a toxic culture, or it's passive aggressive, where it becomes more combatant. So lack of emotional intelligence is one root cause. Poor time management is another one, where people are stuck in this cycle of busy. And if you're one of those people that says that you're busy all the time, you really do need to look at how you plan your days. Your goal is not to be busy. Busy is the enemy of productivity. Honestly, busy is the enemy of happiness. Busy is the pathway to procrastination. Busy is the pathway to anxiety and stress. You don't want to be busy. And what you want to do is manage your time in a way that you're able to get your job done, feel good about who you are as a human, and have a positive influence on those around you. That's kind of what we're trying to do. So yeah, poor time management, root cause, lack of problem solving skills, and that also leads to procrastination, I think, and poor stress management. So that's that anger, kind of really coming through. So what are some examples of passive aggressive behavior? I'm joking. That's one that I've seen and heard a lot. I'm joking. Oh gosh, you're so touchy. JK. Where somebody's kind of trying to use humor as a way to tell you something that they feel they just don't have any subtlety around the way that they do. No offense, but that's a classic case of when people say no offense, but what they're doing is saying here comes lots and lots of offense, and I've just given myself permission to say that. So I mean that subtle digs. People just oh, that's so you, that is. Oh, that's a typical thing that you do. Like if it's done in a negative way, it's one of those little digs chipping away. And you might think, or you might say, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? A big one right now is people are just rude. And I don't mean rude to your face, right? They just don't reply to your emails. They don't reply to your phone calls. I had a classic one the other day. I was working with a group. It wasn't the other day, it was the other week. I was working with a group, and one person said, oh, how do you get people to return your phone calls? My answer is, oh, you're reliant on the person being a good human being and recognizing that that's the right thing to do that. And then this other person said, well, I don't respond to phone calls. If you want to get a response from me, you have to text message me. And of course, you know, in a way, it's not wrong. That's part of the culture definition process. And obviously that was my job working with the team, is we would agree how we would communicate certain messages. But also that demonstrates low emotional intelligence, because someone leaves you a message, what they're asking you to do is to phone you back. They phone them back because that's how they prefer to receive information. And by not phoning them back, you're saying, well, I don't want to do that. And so there's an element of selfishness there. You're like, nah. And then the other excuse is, oh, well, I'm too busy. And that comes back to the poor time management things. Other examples, people who keep score. Oh, yeah, you've done this once before. Or you've done this twice before. Do you remember that time when you did this, right? And they'd seek revenge. People with a consistently fixed mindset, passive aggressive, they look for the negative in everything. My friend Warwick used to call them oxygen thieves. With their negativity, they drain the oxygen out of the room. People who miss deadlines, and don't keep their promises. People who are continually late for meetings and stuff. They've always got an excuse why they're late, and it's always someone else's fault. It's never their fault. In the emails, like, circling back, I've written a load of these things here. It was quite cathartic writing these things down. I was like, I've got a list here. It says, examples of passive-aggressive behaviour include, and then there's about 30 things on the list. They just kept going. I was like, I can't read all of these out on the podcast. It'll be an hour long. I just want to circle back. Who does that? Please advise, as per my last email. These are kind of things. Oh, thanks in advance. It's so passive aggressive. Thanks in advance for doing all of this work that I've just laid out, and I'm now putting you on notice. I think as well, copying unnecessary people in on emails is also an example of passive-aggressive behaviour. Right? Hands up if any of these are relevant in your workplace. Oh my gosh, put your hand down if you're driving. Right, so many. Is it true for you? Are you seeing more and more of these things in the workplace? This passive-aggressiveness, people who take all of the credit and none of the blame. It's another good one. I said I'm not going to read this list. I totally am. Oh no, that'll do. I could keep going. People who misrepresent what other people have said. Just loads of little things like that. At its worst, passive-aggressive behaviour is negative talk behind your back. That's its worst. Gossip is one of the worst things you can do to another human being. Just keep that phrase in mind next time you're gossiping about someone. And it's a very human thing to do, unfortunately. We have to train ourselves not to do it. Leaders are people who say nice things behind people's backs. But as soon as you hear gossip, your goal is to shut it down, not contribute to it. So procrastination, passive-aggressive behaviour. Another poll at the end of last year, 52% of people dealt with it on a weekly basis. That's just too many. And I think what all of those things do is they're a real demonstration of hostility towards other people without resorting to open aggression, which is now seen quite rightly as something that gets escalated to HR. We don't want to see any open aggression between any humans in the workplace ever. So people then resort to passive aggressive behavior, either saying nothing, silent treatment. That was on my list. People who just don't respond ever. Do you ever had that as well, where you just never hear from them ever? That's really, really bad. So rather than being openly aggressive, which they recognize can land them immediately in hot water, they do the next best thing. And so that they're passively aggressive. And it's not unique to one personality. I think sometimes people like to pin it on he's got an action personality. That's so typical of him. Oh, he's a real detail person. He's really nitpicky. But all personality types have got this, what I would call the shadow side to your personality. And the shadow side is the side of you that comes out when you're not being emotionally intelligent. Right. And that's the shadow side is the side that gives rise to this passive aggressive behaviour. But of course, the culture is a huge factor of how likely workers are to actually resort to passive-aggressive behaviour in the first place. I think I mentioned on the podcast before, although I've done so many of these. I had a team member once who badmouthed a senior manager. She reported to me, and I heard her talking about it in the kitchen. And she was talking to three other people. And I just said, hey, that's totally not appropriate. I said it to the group, but I didn't obviously want to be aggressive or passive aggressive towards her. I just said it's completely inappropriate for you to talk in that way about another human being, regardless of their seniority or how you feel. It's like if you've got an issue with that person, you come and talk to me, and I will help you with the skills that you need to be able to deal with that and manage upwards successfully. Otherwise, I'll escalate it if the behaviour towards you is in any way inappropriate. But it wasn't. She just didn't like his style. And so in that instance, that was me as a senior manager setting the example for everybody else, say, hey, that kind of thing is just, it's just not acceptable in the workplace. But if you've got a culture where people excuse that, oh, that's just Colin. No, you'll get used to him. He says those kind of things. Then what it's going to do is perpetuate more passive-aggressive behaviour. So and I've talked about this in the past, everyone's got a role to play in culture. Everybody's got a responsibility to do the right thing. Everybody has got a role to play in making sure that we don't allow this kind of behaviour to become normal in the workplace. And it doesn't matter how senior the person is. And of course, you have to stay in control of your emotions when you're addressing this. There are some people out there, they're fairly narcissistic. I think they want the culture to be... I still think there are some people that want it to be aggressive at times because it suits how they want to believe that the company exists. Or, it's playing to a narrative in their own mind about how they feel. But you can't allow that to happen. Kind of Machiavellianism is another issue where you've got these real manipulative people who are trying to manipulate other people and trying to manipulate situations for their own gain. And again, we collectively as employees, you can't afford to let this happen. There was one player on the US Ryder Cup team who, by all accounts, didn't want to take part in the team activity. And so at that point, he's, kind of on the team, but he's not in the team. There's a distinction between the two. On the team is you get to wear the colours. In the team is, you're contributing to the success of other people. And you recognise that not everything in the, when you're kind of in the team, it can't just be about you and what's comfortable for you. You have to recognise that everybody's dealing with these little things, and everyone will feel uncomfortable at different times. So what can you do? Well, you can define your culture. That's the first thing that you could do. And you should talk openly about how you treat each other so that you can hold each other to account. It's really not as difficult as it may sound. It's one of the cornerstones of the workshops that I run, where we have these conversations about what works, what doesn't, what's appropriate, what's not. And, you might think, well, we shouldn't have to have these conversations. Well, you do. Because you can't make assumptions that people understand culture, that people understand how to behave. The last podcast, the podcast I recorded a couple of shows ago about 5 things everyone should know about culture, has been shared a massive amount of times, right? Because what we need is this collective improvement in our knowledge about what culture actually is before we can actually do something about it. I spend the first maybe 45 minutes of my 2-day culture workshop just talking about what culture is. And 2 speeches I'm doing next week are about, well, this is what high performance culture looks like. And then here's 3 things that you can do just to kind of get the ball rolling. So that definition of culture is all important. It's crucially important. That's the first thing that you can do, because at least then if you've agreed that you're not going to behave in a particular way, it becomes easier to hold people to account. And it becomes easier if you, and this is another thing you can do, is develop a skill of courageous conversations. It's not something that everyone's comfortable doing. Some personalities, largely extroverted people, are more comfortable having courageous conversations, but there's a skill to it and there's an art to it. And if we want to eradicate passive aggressiveness, then we have to be able to have the conversations to be able to say, hey, listen, I didn't appreciate the way that you said that. You simply saying that you're joking doesn't make it funny or acceptable. So please stop doing that. We're being direct. Too often what we do is we apologize before we hold someone to account because we're not very good at courageous conversation. Oh, I'm sorry. I just have to say, no, you're not sorry. The other person should be sorry because of the way that they've treated you. So this skill of courageous conversations is something that we should all develop. And the next thing is to be self-aware, because you don't want to contribute to the culture of passive-aggressive behavior. As soon as you join in gossip, then you're as bad as the person that started it, because you're condoning it, and you don't want that. So be self-aware, understand yourself, understand how you feel. If you feel anger, you should write down how it makes you feel. And then go for a walk. It doesn't need to be long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, come back and then write down how you can use everything that you've written down as fuel for positive good. Right? Don't write an angry email. Don't say something in anger. Always take a minute or two, if you can, to think. Right? And being self-aware is kind of also entails, about you thinking, well, I need to be clear on my words and think about how my actions and my words could be perceived by someone who isn't me. Email is statistically the worst method of communication because it lacks context, right? That's the first thing. And also tone. People will read into it how they believe it's being written, rather than how it may actually be written. The next thing you can do is ask questions of people. Why do you believe that's appropriate? Why do you believe that gossip is the right thing to do? As part of the courageous conversations. But you want to get to the root cause. I think we can help each other with these kind of behaviors if we really want to. If you want to. If the behavior is so bad, then you really do need to report it. You really do need to report it. I think sometimes people don't see their behavior as bad because they're viewing it through their own anger lens and or frustration. It could be. It may not be anger. It may be frustration. If you feel overwhelmed by the number of meetings and emails, you'll probably feel a certain amount of anger and frustration. But at any time, you can change that. And if you say, oh, I can't, then that's just fixed mindset. Because you absolutely can. You absolutely can. Go back and listen to my podcasts on meetings and emails for all the tips about how you can change that. I think, given that time management is one of the root causes, self-awareness I talked about, emotional intelligence, time management is get clear on what the actual priorities are right now so that you can organize yourself, you can organize your time, so you don't get to the point where you're procrastinating, missing deadlines, and then pointing finger of blame at other people. All right, you really want to organize yourself the best you possibly can, and if that means asking for clarification on what's most important, then do that. And I think the last thing is when you're using technology, make it work for you, make it work for the team. Make sure that it doesn't undermine the camaraderie and the collaboration that's required in order for you to be successful in whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is. And different teams use different types of technology in different ways. And that's part of the culture definition process, is to be able to clearly articulate which tools get used for what and when, and what's an appropriate way to use this. So, having heard all of that, is your culture passive aggressive? If so, what can you do about it to raise awareness of it such that you can have a discussion? Maybe you can even run a definition workshop and get to the point where people truly understand what's appropriate, what's not. And we can get back to actually treating each other, if we ever did this at all in your workplace, we can get back to treating people humanely because that's where they do their best work. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Ta-ra for now. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.